Welcome to Doc NYC Live. I'm the festival's artistic director, Tom Powers. Our festival ended earlier this month, but our year-round programming continues. Soon we'll be announcing the winter season of our Doc NYC Pro panels that will run from January to March. Look to our website in the coming week for more information. You'll be able to purchase a season pass or buy tickets to individual panels. Now for today's panel, each year Doc NYC shortlist picks 12 short documentaries and 15 features that we think are among the best of the year. Today and tomorrow, we're talking to the directors from all of those 27 films spread over 7 conversations. So today we've been talking to short documentary makers, and tomorrow we'll be talking to the feature doc makers. We've grouped today's conversations with short filmmakers into 3 very loose themes. Earlier today, we spoke to 4 filmmakers whose works are all portraits in different ways. Then we spoke to filmmakers working in different forms of conflict zones. And you can watch recordings of those conversations archived on our Facebook page. Today's theme that we're going to turn to right now, we've called Personal Histories. Each of these films delves into a different personal history, some very close to the filmmakers, in 2 cases, their own families, and 2 others with a little bit more remove. So let me now bring to the screen all of our panelists, the 4 filmmakers behind the films that we're talking about. Please come on to join me, ladies. Alison Clayman, Taylor Reese, Carol Wynn, and Tiffany Shun. I will give a quick intro to each of these people. So Alison Clayman, give a wave, is the director of Flower Punk, about the Japanese artist Azuma Makoto. He comes from a background as a punk rocker and has turned to making incredible flower art. And that film, Flower Punk, is now playing on the New Yorker's website. And I think you can also find it on YouTube. Taylor Reese joins us from Colorado. Say hi, Taylor, or I'll give a wave, Taylor. Her film is called Ashes to Ashes, produced by Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker, who's also featured in the film. The focal point of Ashes to Ashes is Winfried Rempert, who survived a lynching in 1967 and became an artist and also a fanatical collector of Star Wars toys. So we'll talk more about Ashes to Ashes. Moving up to Canada for our next 2 guests, Carol Wynn is the director of No Crying at the Dinner Table, a film about her Vietnamese Canadian family. And Tiffany Shun is the director of Sing Me a Lullaby. She's joining us from Toronto. And Sing Me a Lullaby is a film about her mother, to put it simply, although it's a little bit more complex than that. Let me start with you, Tiffany, and ask you to describe your film, Sing Me a Lullaby. It's a multi-layered personal history that you filmed over many years. So describe to us what's going on in that film.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for doing all of this. I think it's wonderful, given everything that's going on in this world. The film spans across 14 years and shot primarily in Taiwan as I go and search for my mother's birth parents. I was a young, naive, very confident 21-year-old that felt like I needed to disrupt traditions and break some of the taboos in my family by trying to uncover some history that my family never really wanted to talk about. And that kind of led to this, these understanding and unraveling complex tensions and things that, stayed kind of buried in my mother's life. And obviously that really transforms into multiple layers of really understanding that love comes in many forms. And even though that the film is done, I think what's interesting about doing personal films is that I'm constantly learning. I think I'm very privileged to be able to have that type of opportunity to go on such a journey and to have time pass so I could also grow myself and to be able to see how I've changed as well, and to know that the story continues to unravel well after the film is done. My mother and I's relationship continues to build and grow in various ways, in complex ways of trying to understand each other. But I think ultimately the most important thing through the process of Sing Me a Lullaby is to see my mother as human first, and not just as my mother first. So that's been a special journey.
Let me follow up and ask you. So, when you were 21 years old, as you described, a headstrong young woman, you went to Taiwan to try to find your mother's mother, who she had been estranged from for many years. It was, if I understand the context of the film, you were going there without your mom. It seemed like your mom, had doubts about this quest, or maybe fears, or uh, certainly complex feelings about you going off to do this. Um,
Yeah.
I wonder, in in excavating that personal history, what was motivating you at the time, and what that relationship was like with your mother as you were going off to do this thing that um, it was unclear to me whether she really wanted to have happen.
I think, I preface 21-year-old overly confident and just wanting to break some of the taboos around in my family. I think that growing up and witnessing my mother, walk through the world and give and give so much to her family and to us, but always having these moments where this, when growing up, your parents always say like, "Oh, you're so lucky you have me for this," or "You don't have to walk 1,000 miles to school," or "You have breakfast on the table." My mother always had the undertone in that breath where she always said to us, "You're so lucky you have me to sing you lullabies to sleep," and hence the title "Sing Me a Lullaby." So growing up with always that story and that feeling, and seeing my mother in the way that she walks through the world, and not asking those questions, but kind of wanting to know the answer without directly saying it. I think that just built up inside of me among my rebellious characteristic as, a young teen that was always trying to break rules and trying to push things, push the boundaries a little bit further. I think when I was 21, that just became an opportunity. I was in film school at the time. It was summer. I've never gone to Asia before. I could barely speak Mandarin. I like in the film, I could barely hold a proper conversation. And so part of that, drive was to be able to do that, to just prove to everyone, prove to my mom really, like, I can do this. We could stop this, like, elephant in the room, and let me just go see if I could find them. And it really was just that, was just to prove that. And to have the camera there was to also prove that I wasn't just going out there to party, and that I was really going to try. But no one took me seriously. So I think that was the whole thing, was that everyone thought I was just, joking around.
Yeah.
And so by doing that, and finding them quite early on, really unraveled a lot of things for a lot of people really quickly, including myself. I mean, um, for a long time, after finding my mom's birth parents, and the whole, everything that unravels afterwards, um, the complexities of understanding truth becomes this other layer of understanding what that means, and does truth truly set you free, and the responsibilities that come with truth as well.
All right, lots to unpack there. Let me come back to that. Carol, let me move to you. You're also telling a family story about your own Vietnamese Canadian family. That title, No Crying at the Dinner Table, refers to the fact that you've gathered your father, mother, and sister around the dinner table to talk about family, and family dynamics. There are some tears, and also a lot of laughter in the film. And what's so interesting to me, uh, Tiffany just talked about kind of using the camera as a way to explore her family history. And I feel like in your film, No Crying at the Dinner Table, you're using the camera to have conversations that might not be able to take place without the camera there. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, that's pretty fair. My family is a little weird since they've been involved with my film since I was 15. I started making films in high school, and since this film came out, I've had some people from the Asian community and some people approach me asking, how can I do this with my family? How do I get to build this relationship with them and get them to open up? And I always say this is definitely not an exercise for every family. And my family is weird since they have built that relationship with me as a director and with the camera since I was 15. And my start in cinema and in film was through personal filmmaking. I didn't like my leeway into film was mostly through my high school film program. And before that, I had only consumed Hollywood films. So when I had discovered this ability to speak about what I wanted to say without knowing how to verbalize it through art, I really found a way to heal, to explore my trauma, to grieve, even though I didn't have the tools in real life to. So that came in forms of creating documentaries about cultural identity, about the fear of assimilation, even little things like my dad's immigration from Vietnam to Canada. And when I had stumbled upon their stories in the midst of making No Crying, I knew that it automatically hit me, and I resonated with it so much because it pulled me back to my childhood filled with a lot of grief and funerals, and not being able to understand how to overcome that, not being not having the explanation of what happens after, during grief. And I felt like this was the perfect way to explore intergenerational trauma and love and the unsaid by also creating some healing and change communally.
It's so interesting for me to hear you say that you've been making films with your family since you were 15. In some ways, that makes perfect sense when I watched this film. But in those films that you were making when you were a teenager, what were they like? Were they as probing as what you're doing in No Crying at the Dinner Table, or were they, more kind of the fun home movies that other people make?
Yeah, I think they were a lot less involved in my past films. They were characters. Sometimes they were even light holders. They were subjects of the narrations that I would voice. And there was always a message that I wanted to send to my family, to my community, and I think even to myself, words that I wanted to describe. Like I didn't discover the word intergenerational trauma until I made No Crying. I didn't understand what having a hybrid identity or bicultural identity was until I made a film in high school. So a part of, I think, my message in making the film was to deliver something to my family as well when I was in high school. So they were involved in every way, in front, behind the camera, and as an audience member. And I think it really helped them understand, for me, what I was going through as a teenager.
Thank you, Carol. I'm going to skip to Taylor Reese, who's joining us from Colorado. Taylor, in your film Ashes to Ashes, you're profiling Winfred Rembert, who, as I described before, had survived a lynching attempt in 1967. And we see Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker, who's a producer on your film, and who has kind of made a mission of her life to memorialize the history of lynching in this country. Can you talk about how you came to this film?
Yeah, not in your typical way. I didn't. So Shirley is my neighbor growing up as a kid in Massachusetts, and she was having a dinner party one evening for the neighborhood and kind of describing this event that she was putting on, a memorial service for the 4,000, we know now maybe close to 6,000 or 7,000 African American men, women, and children who were lynched mostly during the Jim Crow era, kind of after the abolition of slavery. And she was putting together like a performance art piece and a funeral and looking for a filmmaker to help. She had actually been looking for a while through universities and different local programs. And my dad was there that night and said, Shirley, I don't know if you remember Taylor. She's been out of high school for a little while, but she's a doc filmmaker now. You should give her a call. So Shirley called, and I remember being, it's not the subject of this film is not my cultural background, nor is it my background as a documentary filmmaker. So it was a pretty kind of tenuous decision that I made to take it on. But at the time, it just felt like it was, going to be a collaboration between Shirley and I to document her event. And that's essentially what it was at the time, before a number of other things happened, meeting Winfred being one of them. And so, it kicked off a really unexpected journey in my life and in the life of our collaborators across the board for a number of years. It took quite a bit of time to finally edit this piece, just knowing the sensitivities of the personal story and where we wanted to go with it. But a really cool journey. And yeah, Shirley and I have been on that together today.
So the results of this film are a 25-minute film, Ashes to Ashes, where we do see one of those ceremonies that Dr. Jackson Whitaker puts together, honoring victims of lynching, bringing their memories forward to contemporary times. But how did you, it feels like there'd be many ways to approach this vast material, and you wound up centering it around Winfred Rembert. How did that come to be?
Serendipitously as well in some ways. I mean, when I was working with Shirley to figure out how we were going to take her 3-day event and turn it into a short film that kind of encapsulated her and her message. At the time, it was just like for posterity, even we didn't have huge goals. She was at an art show and heard about a man who was also an artist that deals with these same time periods and acknowledgments of racial injustices in our history, and that he had survived a lynching and that he only lived an hour and a half away. So Shirley contacted me and said, maybe we should go down and interview him and maybe he could participate. And so we did. And honestly, the first visit was the visit that you see his main telling of his story, which is a really deeply emotionally vulnerable sharing. And we, after that, visited him dozens of times over years, but it started with that. And then, from there, I just think, for me personally, to wrap my mind around the statistics of this part of our history, the number of people who have been violently terrorized and killed, and this is just in this period of time, obviously not in modern times, it's hard to put that into context. And to have, Winfred bring his personal story of that time period and that kind of, violent experience, I think it really contextualizes and personalizes what Shirley is trying to put forth. So we, Shirley and I kind of went back and forth a lot about how much do we make this about the bigger history and about the 4,000 to 6,000 people, or how much do we let, this story be guided by Winfred? And so that's, it's just kind of a dance of their friendship over a period of a year.
So your film is going to be coming to the New Yorker. It's not on there yet, but people can look out for it there. Alison Clayman, your film is on the New Yorker now, Flower Punk. So we've just talked about 3 very kind of heavy films, and now we come to Flowers, which it has to be said that your film is a beautifully dwells on these flower sculptures that this Japanese artist, Azuma Makoto, creates. He's a kind of delightful figure to spend time with. In your film career, you've made films about Ai Weiwei, a feature doc, Ai Weiwei Never Sorry, also about Steve Bannon in The Brink. 5 years ago, you were at Doc NYC with another short about the artist Carmen Herrera called The 100 Years Show. So you've kind of been all over the map in different projects you've chosen. How did you come to focus on Azuma Makoto?
So my friend Mark Silver, who's another great documentary filmmaker and director, but also a cinematographer, he shot this film. He introduced me to Azuma's work and writing. I was living in Japan at the time. It was like 2015. I was looking back through my emails. So 5 years ago was when I first heard of him. And, you know, Mark was like, maybe we could collaborate, do something on him. It was really the combo of his pictures, and which are just, I mean, they're almost so gorgeous that they're intimidating, to be honest. I was like, okay, I have to make, you know, what needs to be added to this, you know, the images themselves are so stunning. So it was really actually Azuma's writing that made me think, okay, like I want to make a piece that, you know, talks about the evolution of the artist. That's something I like to do. And so my husband and I, my husband was there studying or doing his research for his doctorate in Tokyo. And so we just started going to his studio and kind of, you know, getting to know Azuma and Shinoki, his, you know, partner and photographer. And it took many years until we were able to kind of find the right timing and the funds to kind of do the film that we had in mind. And Mark and I went back, and it was actually during a kind of break during the year that I was filming with Steve Bannon. So I feel like it's very much like the way that this film feels this year, I think, or as it's coming out, as this kind of a respite, or, you know, like a meditation into something that it's kind of outside of the daily news cycle, outside of, you know, outside of our context, and yet completely of our world and our context. I think that was very much what it was for me. So we went in 2018 and spent a month filming with him.
You know, I want to, let me stay on you for a second, Alison, because I want to ask everyone about the use of emotion in their work. And, you know, I think that emotion is a, you know, kind of, you know, coin of documentary filmmaking. You know, you're in a way, a documentary film is, you know, sculpting emotion. You know, when do you go deep? When do you pull back? When do you look for some laughter? You know, when do you try to, you know, push in to more of the core of your subject? Alison, I mean, can you talk about how you thought about emotion in telling the story of Azuma?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question, and you know, it reads really clearly for me for a lot of these other films, and I'm so excited to hear these my fellow directors talk about, because we got links. So finally, I've seen everybody's films. So guys, amazing work. I finally got to watch. I'd seen Carol's, but I hadn't seen Taylor and Tiffany's. So good job. And I feel like that's a really interesting question for Flower Punk, because I think that in doing a film on Azuma's work, it kind of touches on what I think of as these like 21st century emotions that I'm not sure we really have a vocabulary for yet. It's like these feelings when you encounter something unimaginably huge, like the nuclear disaster of Fukushima and the tsunami, or climate change, or kind of, you know, the film talks a lot about the lifespan of the flower, and it's that why it's you start to think about the melancholy tinged awe of, you know, the beauty of flowers that, you know, has this like really rapidly, you know, compressed lifespan, you know. I think that these are emotions that we can all relate to, but we don't have great ways to articulate them yet. You know, there's not like easy words for them, but I think that Azuma's flowers are what we have, you know, in this film, and it's something that you can be inspired by and think about how he thinks about it, but really also, you know, let it, I feel like it's a 30 minutes of kind of framing all of that together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a beautiful work, and I hope people will go to the New Yorker if they haven't seen it yet to watch Flower Punk. Tiffany, let me move to you on the question of emotion, because there are some very big emotions in this story of your mother being reunited with her mother after decades of separation. And you know, as you were describing before, it's really 3 generations of women. You as a young woman, your mother is a pretty young mother, and her mother, you know, all of whom have gone through different kinds of emotional churning. As you were, you know, sculpting this film, how did you, you know, think about, like, you know, where to put these emotional beats? I mean, the film kind of like starts right away. You're in Taiwan, like, you know, on a journey, you know, uncovering clues that might lead you to a grandmother you've never met before.
I mean, I think it's so interesting when you were talking earlier about, like, you know, how do you delve into like such hard, raw emotions and that finding that balance. And I think, you know, I always feel that humor, levity is the gateway into connecting us into, you know, the human condition, and being able to create some accessibility to, you know, viewers to be able to take it in, to take a breath as well. So much of that exploration, even while we were documenting, maybe it's just my personality as well. Like I tend to try to find that moment where we can laugh, you know, even in that journey as well. And hanging out with my grandmother, like karaoke, like there's a reason why singing and, you know, karaoke is such a thing. It's like that, just that release, you know, and so much of that really, you know, kind of covers throughout the whole film, the singing, that expression, that really allowed us to be able to have this moment to sit with, you know, and to breathe into it, what was happening, what was transpiring while filming. I mean, each year that I was filming with my mother, with my family, there always poses new challenges, the emotional challenges, of course. But when we're carving out the story, I mean, as we all know, as filmmakers, no film is made by one person, thank goodness. So much of documentary filmmaking, I think our editors become our therapists. At least all my editors become my therapists. I don't know about you girls, but like for me, I've been so blessed to be able to have collaborators with me. Feng Shi is our editor, so is Ricardo Acosta, and we really finished this film during also the pandemic as well. So like the first lockdown that we had, which I think offered a lot of, like, you know, quiet and no noise. So I think that was also a blessing in disguise, was to be able to have that focus and to be able to, you know, carve out what we have today. Was really finding that balance, because it could have easily been a much longer film as well. But what was, I think, where we landed, I think the film tells you how much it is needed to be able to take that whole journey in, and it kind of revealed itself while we were in the cutting process, versus like needing to hit a deadline or hit like a mark of like, it has to be 20 minutes or it has to be 15 minutes. I think I was thinking like that earlier on in the process, because I actually started making, like, my first film was a feature-length doc, The Apology, and I have so much more love and respect for short form filmmaking, because it's a new set of challenges where if you can try to pack it in there and to be able to go through that, you know, and go through all those beats and those arcs, it's a big challenge. It's a lot to take into consideration, and how people view stories in that shorter form is also different than a feature length as well. There's also this unspoken expectation to deliver something within a shorter time period as well. So I think in some advantage coming from a feature length to going into short, I kind of just had that mindset of like, okay, how do I make this what I am trained or what I know of in this shorter format, and trying to find that balance. But it was definitely because I also had incredible editors to work through a lot of the things. And I don't know about you, Carol, but like, you know, doing a personal film, there's also the vulnerability of like, you know, when things become difficult, we are able to, in like, you know, regular life, be able to sometimes walk away. But when doing a personal film, it's almost like you kind of just have to peel it back even further and really delve deeper as to why you did that or why you were like that. It doesn't have to make it into the film, but it really plays a psychological, you know, a bit of a trip for you to process that while carving out the film. So it's really great to have a strong team around to navigate through those storylines and those beats as well.
So, Carol, let me turn to you with this question. In No Crying at the Dinner Table, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you did is you filmed interviews with your mother, father, and sister individually, getting them to talk about family dynamics. And then in the film, you sit them down at the same table and play their interviews for each other. So they're getting to hear things that maybe people wouldn't have been able to say to the full family, but you were able to record them. And just the title "No Crying at the Dinner Table" has a little bit of a sense of humor to it that I think is prevalent in your film. You know, how were you trying to manage emotion in your film?
Totally. Well, I think the subject matter is really heavy, and walking in on set, we all knew that there was going to be some crying to be done. I had done pre-interviews with all of my family members, and we knew what we were going to talk about and where we were going to go. I think grief is something that, especially when you lose someone close to you, that emotion never fades. So when we were on set, I wasn't worried that because we had done so many pre-interviews and research and talked about these subjects, that these emotions would resurface. It was a very heavy set, but also very healing. At the end of my film, you can hear one of my cameramen reaching out to my mom and being like, we understood what you guys were going through, even though we didn't understand Vietnamese. Behind the camera, my cameramen were crying, and it was very impactful. Leading up to that moment, before I was able to reveal the interviews to them in the film, I had to edit down each interview that was an hour long to the core of it, so that these 3-hour interviews could last just 30 minutes for us to sit down and listen to them together. And then that was also repeated in editing with each and every interview, finding where's the climax of this interview, where does it start, where does it end, and then being able to assemble them all three together. I think what was really interesting heading into the shoot was also that I didn't really know how they would react at the end, listening to the stories. Honestly, I thought I had written in my rough documentary script that they would just sit there stiff, awkward, and not really know what to say by the end, as we used to do at the dinner table with big, emotional, uncomfortable situations. But I was very shocked at how the process ended up and the conversations that we had afterwards that you don't see on the camera, and the developing relationship that we're still pushing towards today. I think by the end of the film and in the edit, I realized that the end of my film wasn't really a closure. It wasn't an end, but it was actually a beginning to something new. And that also, like Tiffany said, was worked out outside the edit room. I had to figure out where I wanted to go and which step that I wanted to take with my family from here, and how to make this worthwhile in real life and change and heal together.
So in the film, we see your mother, father, and sister. You're behind the camera. Um, Clearly, what you've just described, you had to churn through a lot of family history and emotions to make this film. But on screen, it almost feels like you're getting let off easy, being behind the camera while putting the rest of your family under a microscope. And I wonder how you thought about that choice of where to put yourself in this group.
Oh, totally. I didn't go into No Crying with the intention of making this film. I went into it with the intention of making a fiction film, actually, about how love assimilates through the generations. And it was actually through my research that I discovered these stories from each and every one of my family members, which I thought was very coincidental. And with these secrets that I had in my hand, that no one else in my family had heard them speak about, we were all present for the loss of my grandparents, for the loss of my uncle, but we never really heard it verbalized. But with that in my hand, I knew that I had a power that, I didn't want to release these stories that are not mine to anyone else. I wanted to be able to have them speak for themselves and be able to say what they want to say, regardless of if there was a language barrier in our family or if there was a cultural barrier. So there was also a lot of trust building and stories that I had to tell to my family to be able to get to that point where we were all comfortable with being in this process, and we were all comfortable with sharing and finally kind of exchanging and listening, which was a big part of it.
So if people are watching this and haven't yet seen No Crying at the Dinner Table, you can go to Vimeo and watch it. It's only 15 minutes and a really great viewing experience. Taylor Reese, let me ask you about Ashes to Ashes. So Winfried Rembert has this very traumatic history of being the victim of a lynching that he survived in 1967. An experience that he describes haunting him for 50 years afterwards. But he's also an artist. And one of the quirky aspects of him is he is a major Star Wars fan and incredible collector of Star Wars toys and memorabilia, which you foreground early in the film, and it is a kind of way of letting us into some heavy material on the history of lynching. Can you describe how you thought about emotion in your film, and when to push forward and when to pull back?
Sure. Yeah. Well, starting with Shirley and her project, the memorial, it's obviously, her goal with that was for the attendees of that funeral to have an emotional experience. She's an artist trying to evoke emotion through this really intense 3 days, the highs and the lows, the actors and their stories, the tragedies and emotions and the joy of gospel music and eulogies and kind of everything that went into that.
And so a portion that we see in your film is it's a funeral or a mock funeral with a casket. People in this congregation are given the name of a lynching victim that they speak out. Some people are acting out the life of some of these lynching victims. So it's an immersive experience.
Yeah, and with a lot of heavy emotion for sure too. Although Shirley, who I think you get a taste of her personality, she's a physician. She hits pain and trauma head on in her work, and so she's pretty lighthearted and forthright with her way of thinking about these really deep, traumatic, and painful things, especially for the African American community. And then Winfried as an individual, from the moment that I've met him, he is all of his emotions like so right there to see. I mean, we went from laughing to making Star Wars costumes and having our own lightsaber fight on the porch, to being deep in listening to his story, to yelling at the dogs. I mean, I've traveled with him. I've laid on his chest crying in hospitals when I thought he was going to die. I mean, he's just this. I mean, if it wasn't obvious, he wanted this story to be told. And so the very first day we spent together, he's like, I got it. I got this story, and I'd like to include it. And there it is. And he cried, and we all cried. And so I think one of the things that I walked away from all of that, from Shirley's event and the emotions of that, to being present with Winfred and documenting his story, was like, yeah, how do I help craft this, with my collaborators and advisors in a way that wasn't just going to feel like this horrifically sad tragedy thing that really dehumanized the stories and the people who were the intention is really to honor. So yeah, the great thing about Winfred is he's just this hilarious, lighthearted human despite what he has survived. And there was a debate between myself and the editor and some of our collaborators about, like, do we put the Star Wars scene in the front, or do we put it in the middle to kind of like give people a break from the heaviness, or do we put it in at the end to kind of give them some reprieve from what they've gone through? And the decision that I came to is to put it in the beginning, because I think it just helps you, just feel so much of a connection and an admiration and a love for this person that has nothing to do with their sad story, which is what I feel. And then you start from there, and then you are like exposed to this reality and everything that he has kind of gone through and what he's done with that pain, which is amazing, and what Shirley is doing for a collective trauma. But you stick with him, and I think that that's what we tried to do, to kind of hold that emotion.
Let me stay on you for a second, because I do want to ask everyone about the subjects of their film and what they thought about the finished film. And so, in the case of Winfred, I mean, he's going through some very traumatic, churning up very traumatic stuff in this film. What's it like for him to watch the film, if he has, or to have it out in the world?
Yeah, we had some really sweet moments over the course of making it, where I would show him cuts. I mean, the first 5-minute cut I showed him, it was, I can't believe I got a teaser, just kind of joyed by the act of filmmaking together. Then there were times when, I think, as someone with such a prolific life, who's done so many things, who has a family and multiple kids, there was that time when we really had to discuss that this was such a small portion of his life, and that we were using this small portion of his story to bring context and understanding to also what Shirley was doing. And Shirley and he had to kind of talk about that as well. And so I think, Winfred actually wants to come visit me in Colorado and go fishing and make a story called Winfred Goes Fishing. So we have some other stories to tell, but when he finally saw the final version of the film at the premiere, I sat with him, and he was crying, and it was hard for me, and I think him and all of his family to watch that together. But we knew we had kind of gotten to that place that was where what we were going to focus on. And he got up on stage after and opened his heart to the audience. And I do hope that, Winfred actually has a book coming out about his whole life, but I also wish that there were other, more stories about him that weren't just this one portion. But we're obviously just so grateful for his courage to share that specific aspect of his life.
Yes, yeah, we'll look out for that book. Alison, in the case of the Japanese artist Azuma Makoto, maybe a little different than some of these other characters, in that he's a public figure. He's someone who's used to, as an artist himself, engaging and putting forward a persona. So I wonder what it was like for him to, give up control to you to tell his story, and what his reaction to the experience has been.
Yeah, he was a really fabulous collaborator in that sense. And I keep having that experience with many artists I've worked with where it's really amazing to feel their respect for like, this is your thing, even though it's about me. Everybody has control issues or image issues, but still it's like, I could feel that respect. I think the hardest thing for him was in the process of filming, I think he's very used to things being more intentionally plotted out, when it comes to documentation. So it was like a lot of in the beginning of, him sort of to me and to Mark, like, what do you want? What do you want me to do? We're like, I don't know. Well, what would you do right now? Like we just want to, what would you do? And it's like, I feel like that was like a strange concept. And I was almost like, I think I realized late that I needed to like reset that, as the foundation. And a lot of where we ended up going was kind of spontaneous, came from conversations, whether it's going to his hometown, going to the Fukushima area, a lot of it came up in the process. So the process was really fun. And you're right. I mean, I think seeing the documentary, they thought it was great. We were able to premiere before the pandemic really, impacted in-person festivals, since we were at last year's Doc NYC and IDFA, but his schedule didn't permit traveling. So, I haven't had the experience of being with him at a screening. He is planning to come. He's been saying this for the last year, that he's planning to come to New York in March, is still tentatively what he's doing it. He, since last year, was like, I want to come to New York and do a work for the city. I mean, I think honestly, it was like looking at New York during our hardest first wave few months, and sort of to say like, I want there to be a time when it's kind of in the past, and to make a big flower sculpture, maybe somewhere in Brooklyn, maybe downtown Manhattan, and like in honor of like this experience. Again, I don't know the words to describe what it would be signifying, but I think we all know what it would be signifying. And I really, really hope that comes to be, and that it also can be a moment where we're in a better place.
The moment when we have the IFC Center open and we could have a screening of the film with him and you there. That would
right.
Be
maybe he should go to Washington Square. We can talk to him about where he's going to do it, but it would be so amazing. So yeah.
Tiffany, your film had its premiere in September at the Toronto Film Festival, if I'm not mistaken. So not an opportunity for your mom to experience it with an audience yet, sadly. But someday that day will come. But what's it been like for your mother to have this story out in the world?
Well, we were really fortunate. We were able to, during our TIFF premiere, we were able to do a private screening in a theater. So this was just before they had the new rule of like capping off 25 people inside. So we actually were able to have 50 people inside, and we rented out the Royal Cinema, which was a beautiful 350 seat theater with 50 people that we were able to socially distance and mask up. And that was really important to me. I really wanted my mom to have that festival experience, to be able to watch it with family, friends, and colleagues, that really didn't actually know her story at all. They knew snippets of it, but not to the full extent. And not many people have seen any footage of what I had shot or captured in Taiwan. So it was like over a decade. So to be able to give that to my mother, and to be able to see her on stage, and we kind of did a little Q&A for her. It was a night where I just felt so proud for my mom to be able to be fully seen. That to me completed everything, completed this journey for me. And the next part is really to be able to share it with our friends and family in Taiwan. We haven't been able to travel there. We would like to, because my grandmother's health is declining even further, and we aren't able to get there. So that's our next goal, is to be able to watch it together as a family, safely, obviously. But I'm just glad that she was able to have this. In her experience, you know, she was part of the variations of our edits and our cuts, you know, and she'd always make a little bit of a comment like, "Oh, Tiffany, do you really have to use that shot? Oh, look at me. Oh my God." And she would just be so mortifiedly embarrassed. But overall, you know, I'm so proud of her because I think that having her part of the journey of while we're editing this and watching her react to it, I think she's also able to grow and see herself and see her strength. I think that that is probably the most important thing, is to give that back, you know, is to be able to see how incredibly resilient you are, mom, and raising 3 kids and everything that you have gone through, you know, and to see that encapsulated within, you know, under 30 minutes. I think that there is a pride now that I could see with her in this film, and that's really special.
Carol, in the case of your family, as you've described, they've been active in your filmmaking since you were a teenager. I feel like No Crying at the Dinner Table is probably taking it to a different level for them. And it feels like it's enough of an event for them to come out and share these feelings with each other, and then in a film it's going out into a wider world. So what was their feelings about this as a finished film?
So I shared the film with them on my laptop before it premiered at anywhere, played at any big screen. I really wanted them to have a private, intimate screening experience before. And they were really proud. I think seeing themselves on the screen for the first time, saying the words that they said, it really hit them that these stories meant a lot more and impacted them and marked them a lot more than they had originally thought, because they had weighed these stories on their shoulders for so long and bottled them up. I think they originally thought also that why is my story special? Everyone has lost their mom before. Everyone has gone through grief. I'm nobody famous, so why are you putting my story on a screen? And it wasn't until we premiered the film and they were sitting in the theater of people who shed tears, people who came up to thank them on how brave they were and tell them that they were able to see their mother reflected in my own mother, that they saw the universality of the film. They were very proud. Like Tiffany's mom as well. My mom had similar comments of like, next time if you put me in a film, can I wear something like more fancy? Like, can you put more makeup on me or something? I'm like, no, mom, I want you to be you. So yeah, they were really proud.
Seems like you owe your mother a film with full hair and makeup, though.
Oh, I don't know about that. We'll see. Maybe one day.
So we've just got a few minutes left this conversation, and let me stay on you for a second, Carol, because I want to ask about time and how you each arrived at the length of your short films. In case of your film, Carol, it's 15 minutes long. You're telling multiple generations of family history. Did you at some point in this process like feel a temptation to make this a feature-length film, or how did you get yourself to the restraint of keeping this in 15 minutes?
It was all in the edit. We just wanted to find the core of what I wanted to say from each and every story, from each and every narrative shot, and give the film the time that it needed, whether it be 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and 15 minutes was the mark that we arrived at, that allowed us to give enough space for the tone, the style, the concept of the film, and just allow them to speak their full story.
Tiffany, let me ask you the same question. Your film is 29 minutes, also no shortage of material packed into those 29 minutes. had you considered a version of this that would be longer, and how did you arrive at 29 minutes as opposed to 40 minutes or something shorter?
I mean, I wanted to explore this film originally as a feature length scripted, which is what I'm working on right now. And I think the process of, really doing the research and really delving into the story through a documentary, because that's my background, was kind of like seemed to be a very practical thing to do. And so the length was for me was to also give myself a bit of a discipline to also explore this and what are the major beats in there and things that I wanted to really delve in. And so the length kind of took that shape based on what I wanted to work on as the feature length to write. And so that became, this abstract like goalpost of what to work within in that time frame. Obviously I was kicking myself in the foot as I was in post because it was just so hard and daunting. But at the same time, I do think that having it at this length allows the story to be able to be watched and played and shown and screened, and also in a very accessible way, which maybe it would have been different if it was if I attempted to try to make this any longer as well. So I think for what I want to do afterwards, I think it was the appropriate length that I wanted to explore this in.
And so I should say, Sing Me a Lullaby, you shared with me, is recently being acquired for distribution, hasn't in the United States anyways, hasn't been announced yet. If people are watching in Canada, can watch it on CBC Gem, but eventually Sing Me a Lullaby will make its way out more widely in the world. Taylor Reese for Ashes to Ashes, it's 25 minutes. Again, there could be a version of this film where Winfred is just one character and you delve into the lives of other people who have been affected by the history of lynching. How did you arrive at that 25-minute shape?
Yeah, we were, Shirley was in the process of continuing to develop her Ashes to Ashes programming and expanding it potentially. And Winfred was actually, he's an artist. He does a lot of different kind of paintings, but he is in the process of documenting his own life in a series, and it's not complete. And he was going to be doing some of the harder paintings around his around this incident. And so we were actually continuing to film, and we were going to film that whole process and follow Shirley and just basically follow these artists and their evolving friendship over the time and potentially make that a feature. But it was the spring of 2019, and I got a phone call that Winfred was in the hospital and that things had kind of taken a turn for the worse. Thankfully, he has 9 lives, maybe 900, I hope. But basically, it was kind of just can we just finish this edit in 3 weeks? And we were nowhere near there. We had an hour-and-a-half long cut from Shirley's memorial service that was a separate thing for her, and we had some of Winfred's interviews and some of their time together. But all of a sudden it was crunch time, and I went to LA. A friend and advisor, Alison Davis, who is a Black writer in LA, who really helped kind of me quickly assess some of the more difficult tonal points that we were approaching. The composer Logan Nelson wrote the entire score in 3 days, and 25 was where it landed. I mean, it was a miracle.
So it was really kind of driven by this, fear of Winston's mortality that made you just focus and push and get it done.
We were like, what can this be that captures his spirit and the spirit between Winfred and Shirley and what they're going for, and what gift they want to bring to the world. So, and then Telluride Mountain Film saved us a spot, and we slid it in at the last second, and we got to have an art gallery showing, and Winfred and Shirley and Patsy all got to come, and it was a huge fun moment. And we've gotten to have a couple of those together as well before the pandemic ended. But now we're all very experienced Zoom
and, interviewers.
Families,
Yeah.
the fun continues.
So again, Ashes to Ashes will be coming to the New Yorker, so look out for it there. Alison Clayman, I'm going to finish with you. You've made feature-length docs like I Weiwei, Never Sorry, and The Brink. You've also made shorts like the 100 Years Show about Carmen Herrera. How do you like think about shorts and features in your career?
I think I have a real high bar for, what I think is, when it comes to runtime. I guess I just really never I'd rather hear people say I wanted to see more always. And I think there's just something within me that's also my relationship to the story, but also what I expect is like the ongoing or the time that I'm going to spend with someone, or, so I feel like I kind of have a sense of whether something, it's going to be unfolding and it's going to take a feature length or it's short. I've never gone in and been like, this is how short, or this is how long the short is going to be. And I've never been right. Both the 100 Year Show and Flower Punk kind of ended up close to the 30-minute mark. But I mean, I definitely go in being like, making everyone on the team aware. If it's 10 minutes, if it's 15, like I want it to be what it should be. But I think I just always see a lot of story and end up, we kind of put lives and archive and big bodies of work in this time. But I love making shorts. I often find that it's like the biggest labor of love in a way, because it's just a different distribution process. And it's sort of like, no one's going to care about your film more than you always, and like especially with a short. But I feel like it always feels like you're watering and nurturing and keeping that, you want to give these films the best life they can and to reach the most people. So yeah, with Flower Punk, I really was like, maybe it'll be 10 minutes, that'd be awesome, 15 minutes, but this was kind of how it ended up.
It's true that no one will care about your film as much as the filmmaker, but we care about all four of these films very much. Encourage viewers again, go see Flower Punk on New Yorker right now. Go see No Crying at the Dinner Table on Vimeo. Keep an eye out for Ashes to Ashes coming to the New Yorker, and for Sing Me a Lullaby to have its distribution announced soon in the US, or if you're in Canada, watch on CBC Gems. As we wrap up, I want to give a big thanks to Doc NYC Live's producer, Allison Morgan, to our festival coordinator, Sarah Modo, and executive director, Raphael Nahausen, who's been manning the Facebook page all day today. Join us tomorrow for 4 conversations with the directors of Doc NYC's shortlist for features. We're going to get it started at 11:30 a.m. here on Facebook Live. Our first conversation is with Kirsten Johnson of the film Dick Johnson is Dead, Garrett Bradley of the film Time, and Victor Kosakowski of the film Gunda. That should be a very strong conversation to kick off our day, and then we'll be here all day. The sun is now down here in the Northeast where we are. So I want to thank you all again. Taylor Reese, Alison Clayman, Carol Wynn, and Tiffany Shun. Thank you for being here.
Bye, thank you.